Welcome to day 4 of the Chelsea Pants Sew Along. We're almost done with our pants. You should have something that really looks like a pair of pants with the front and back seams sewn, and that it's really starting to look like a pair of pants. The only thing that it's missing right now is a waistband. So today I'm going to show you how to construct the waistband. So let's get started.
All right, well, welcome back. The last step that we're going to work on in constructing our Chelsea pants is the waistband. So at this point, you should have your pants sewn up so that you have, I know I'll twist it here, you have them attached so that you have a front and a back attached. You've got the legs attached all in there. And then you've top stitched these seams. So you should be ready to go and ready to attach your waistband. Now you should have 4 waistband pieces. One set is going to be the lining and one set is going to be your main outer fabric. Now if you are working with a fabric like stretch denim or a pont or something that doesn't have a lot of stretch, the pattern requires at least 25 to 30% stretch, and this pont has that, but it's not super stretchy. So I generally prefer to use something else for the waistband lining. This is an athletic brushed poly. You could also use something like Supplex. You could use the same fabric for the inner waistband as you're using for the outer, but you just might find that you prefer the feel of another fabric, or if your fabric is really thick, it might be nicer to use a thinner fabric for the inner waistband pieces. Now in the instructions, it told you to trim off a 1/4 inch along the top of each of your lining pieces, across the top of the back lining and the top of the front lining. So if you haven't done that already, you would want to go ahead and do that now. I have done it, but you can just grab your ruler, you know, if you hadn't done it yet, and you know, kind of position it at a 1/4 inch and just go ahead and trim off that piece. That's so that the inner waistband will roll to the inside once you've constructed your pants and won't be visible from the outside, because you're not going to be understitching that seam so that it maintains its stretch. So the first thing you're going to do now when you're constructing your waistband, and I'm going to start with my lining, is take my back waistband piece, and then I'm going to attach, that's just my iron letting me know it's not hot anymore, attach my front waistband to my back waistband piece. The front waistband piece kind of has a subtle curve to it, so you want to make sure that you're attaching that the right way, that the top is going to the top of the back waistband. So I'm just going to grab my clips, clip it in a couple of places here. And then on the other side as well. You're going to do the same process with both your inner and outer waistbands. The only difference is that on the outer waistband pieces, you're going to want to top stitch. If you did top stitch on your main pant pieces. So now I'm just going to sew this so that it's in a loop, and I'm going to do the same with my outer fabric here, matching it up so that that curve is at the right place. The narrower part should be on the top. Now I find that I get a better fit if I narrow it up at the top a little bit, because my waist is smaller than my hips. So I want this to still be able to go over my hips. It doesn't have a zipper, so you want to make sure that you don't make your waistband so narrow that it won't go over your hips at all. But I do kind of narrow mine a little bit at the top here when I'm cutting it out. That's just based on my body and my preference. Okay, so now I've got both of those pinned so that they're in a circle. and I'm going to go over to my serger and serge those, and then this one I'm going to top stitch so that it matches the top stitching on the front of my pants. And this is one of those unique features of these pants that gives it a really cool look. So I'm going to do that and come back and show you what that looks like. Okay, so now I've got both my inner and my outer waistband pieces sewn, and I've top stitched the outer waistband piece so that it matches my pants. And I did press this seam toward the center front. That's what I did when I top stitched my pants, was press that seam toward the center front, so I want to make sure that this matches. Now, to help with bulk, you're going to want to press the seam on your lining pieces the opposite way. So I press the seam on this toward the back. Now what you're going to do is you're going to turn one of those right side out and one of those inside out, and you're going to slip one over the other. So like that. And you're going to be pinning it all the way around the top, making sure that those seams are matching up. And then you're going to sew all the way around the top in a loop. So I'm going to go ahead and pin that so you can see what I'm doing. And again, here your seams are pressed in opposite directions. So I've pinned all the way around the top. Now if you look at it, you'll notice that my inner waistband piece is about 1/4 inch shorter than my outer waistband piece, which is exactly what you want, because once you sew it, turn it to the inside, then it's going to roll toward the inside and not be visible, which is why I can get away with using kind of a contrast color scrap there. So I'm going to go ahead and serge or sew. You would want to use a stretch stitch if you're using your sewing machine all the way around that top edge. Now the instructions do have a little hint that you can use clear elastic after you've sewn this seam. So I'm going to sew the seam, and then I'll come back and I'll show you what that would look like if you were using clear elastic. I use clear elastic in some of mine and not in others. So it really, for me, depends on the fabric that I'm using and what my preference is. But I'll show you how to do that if you feel like you want to use that option. Alright, so I've serged that upper edge all the way around the top of the waistband. You can see that my lining is shorter than my main fabric, which is exactly what we want. Now, if you want to use clear elastic, here's what you would do. You would open it up, and then you would keep the seam pressed toward the main fabric. Then you would take your clear elastic, it's kind of hard to see because it's clear, but place it right below the seam line. So it's right here below the seam line, and then you would just zigzag it on all the way around. And because it's on the inner waistband, even though the zigzag will show on the other side, it's not going to show on the top of your pants at all. You don't want to stretch it at all when you're doing this. You just want to sew it at a 1-to-1 ratio. And then when you get over, back to the place where you started, you just overlap it, zigzag a little bit, and then cut it off. So that is definitely an option. That's something that I use in some other green style patterns and that I've used in a couple of pair of pants, of these pants, but I'm not going to do it in this fabric because this athletic brush poly that I'm using for the inner waistband has quite a bit of stretch, and I think it's going to hold me in well, and I don't think I'm going to need that clear elastic to help them stay up. And I did use like a serger on this seam, so it is stretchy. But it is definitely an option in the pattern that I feel like is useful for sure in some situations. So if you're going to do that, you would do that now. And then, looks like I've got a stray thread here. And then at this point, you would turn your inner waistband toward the inside. You would press that. If you did put in clear elastic, you want to be really careful when you're pressing it because you don't want to melt the clear elastic. but I like to give it a good press along this edge. I don't top stitch here. You could with like something like a cover stitch or stretch stitch, but I don't usually do that. And then you're going to match up the bottoms, and you'll see at this point how that causes the inner waistband to roll to the inside so that you can't see it. So I just like to, at this point, press and then clip or baste the two waistbands together along the bottom so that you can get ready to sew it to the pants. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll come back and show you what that looks like and what the next step is. Okay, so I've pressed along my top seam. I have it upside down right now because so I'll show you right side up. I've pressed along my top seam. You can see how the lining is rolling nicely to the inside because it's that little bit shorter. Now I've gone ahead and I've clipped it all the way around except for that point of the V. And on that point of the V, I've sewn a basting stitch at just under 3/8 of an inch. This is the same way as you would construct kind of the green T neckline, this little V in the back of the pants. And the more accurately you can do it, the nicer they're gonna look. So I've basted along there. When I sew my seam at 3/8, which is just a little bit farther in, that basting is just going to be invisible. So you're going to want to turn your waistband so that the right side is together with your pants and place it over your pants. And then you're going to want to start with that V. So this is my center back seam of the pants that I've got here. And I'm just going to place the tip of my V waistband right at that center back seam of the pants. And then I like to use a clip or a pin here right there. And so what you're going to do is you're going to go over to the sewing machine and you're going to drop your needle in right at the point of that V, right past your guiding line there. And you're going to sew baste out for a couple inches, baste out, then pick it up, baste out for a couple inches in the other direction, and then check and make sure that your V is perfectly centered before you do something more permanent, like stitch it on with a stretch stitch or serge it. So I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'll show you what that looks like. Alright, so now I'm over at my sewing machine and I've still got it set to a basting stitch, and I've put a pin right at the kind of point of that V in the center back of my pants. So I am going to move my needle so that it is exactly at that point. I'm going to remove my pin so that I don't sew over it. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew, again, a basting stitch at 3/8 of an inch right along one edge of that V. So, let's see if I can do this and hold the phone at the same time. And I'm just going to make sure that as I go along that it lines up. Now I can cut that. So you can see what I've done is I've just started at that point and sewn for a couple of inches along it. Now I'm going to flip the pants over and sew along this side, and I'll come back and I'll show you what that looks like, and then we'll see if we've got a good V. Alright, so now you can see on the back of my pants I've done the basting stitch here, then I flipped it over to the basting stitch starting again at that point of the V down here, so that when I flip them over to check, all I've got at this point is just that V done. Got a pretty good V going on there. I'm pretty happy with how that sits. So now I don't need to do any more in my sewing machine because I'm going to go over and do the rest on my serger. Again, starting and stopping at that point of the V and using my basting stitches as a guide for where I should sew. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll come back and show you what that looks like. We're almost done. Woohoo! Alright, so now I'm over here at my serger and I'm serging the waistband onto the pants. And something that I didn't mention is that you're going to want to really make sure that the front seam of your waistband lines up well with the front seam of your pants. So I can put a pin there. That's what I've done here. If you're worried about it, you can baste it together and just make sure that, that it's not going to shift around at all while you're serging. This is the part that can get a little bulky, which is why you pressed the lining seam one way and the waistband seam another. So I put my pin here, and I'm going to hope for the best, but if you really want to make sure, you might want to just baste that area right there. And those are just going to be your guide points for attaching your waistband as well, to make sure that you're attaching it evenly. But there shouldn't need to be really any, you're not going to be stretching it on like you would a full knit waistband, like on cuffs or something like that. This is just going to be applied pretty much at a 1-to-1 ratio. So now I've got my waistband completely serged on. My serger thread didn't match quite well enough, so I actually did end up going over this with my sewing machine with a lightning bolt stretch stitch. So at this point you could, press it down and top stitch it if you wanted to. I'm not going to do that, but I'm really happy with the way that the V came out. And sometimes top stitching can even emphasize that even more, but I'm really happy with the way that that looks. So your only step that you have left now is just to hem the pants. So I'll see you back here tomorrow for the last step in our Chelsea pants sew along.